Let me start with something that's uncomfortable, but it's important to talk about it. A lot of people taking the LSAT right now are aiming too low. Not because they're lazy, not because they don't want it badly enough, but because they're using an outdated map. LSAT scores don't mean what they used to mean. I've been teaching the LSAT since 2005, and over the past 21 years or so, I've seen a massive amount of LSAT score inflation. The consequence is a score that feels strong today would have been an incredible score not that long ago. But today, it unfortunately often puts you in a very crowded group of applicants who all look just okay. And if you don't understand the changes, you could do everything right. You could study hard, hit your goal score, and apply smart, but still end up confused and surprised and disappointed by your outcomes. That is why so many applicants are saying things like, I was above last year's median, I thought I was competitive, and I don't understand why I'm waitlisted everywhere. And that confusion is simply a consequence of score inflation colliding with old and outdated expectations. Let's break down what score inflation actually means. It doesn't mean the LSAT is fake or that high scores are meaningless. What it means is simpler. It just means that high scores are more common. That is it. There are more people scoring in ranges that used to be rare and outstanding. And when more people occupy the same score range, the value of being in that range reduces significantly. Think about it this way. If only 5 people run a marathon in less than 2 hours and 10 minutes, that time is incredible. It's legendary. But if 500 people or 5,000 people do it, it's still impressive, but it doesn't carry the same weight. That's what's happening on the LSAT. Now let's talk about the problem of score compression. People will think a 170 is a 170 or a 173 is a 173. Those numbers don't change. And numerically, that is technically true, but functionally, there is a massive difference over time. The top of the LSAT scale has become compressed. That means more applicants share the same scores or similar scores, and small differences carry less weight. As a consequence, admissions officers see clusters of scores and students are not standing out in quite the same way. So when you say, I got a 171 and you pat yourself on the back, admissions is thinking to themselves, okay, so did a lot of other people. That doesn't mean your score is bad, but it does mean it doesn't automatically lift you the same way it used to. And one major reason for the LSAT score inflation is accommodations. And everyone kind of tiptoes around this because it's uncomfortable. But the truth is that extra time accommodations are no longer rare, they are structural. And this matters because time pressure is no longer a shared constraint on the LSAT. The LSAT used to test whether you could reason accurately under tight time pressure. But now it's testing whether you can reason accurately, sometimes under pressure for some people, in other cases, not under that same pressure. And admissions committees know this. They are aware of the rise in accommodations, which means they don't trust those minor distinctions quite the same way they used to. So a 175 today doesn't communicate exactly the same thing it did 10, 15, 20 years ago, like back when I took the LSAT and got my 175. So things have gotten noisier. And so decision makers don't rely quite as much on the value of that high score, which means you got to get a score that's even higher to compensate. Another major impact on the devaluation of LSAT scores is the removal of logic games. And logic games rewarded your ability to grind. You could start off terrible on the LSAT and become elite through practice and repetition alone. Your effort showed up directly on your score report. Your score was a consequence of the effort that you put in. And what replaced logic games, which was just another logical reasoning section, is still very valuable, of course, but it's subtler. Which brings us back to the score inflation. There is a band of LSAT scores that feel safe, but no longer is. Scores that sound elite and impress your friends and family, look great when you post on Reddit, they don't actually separate you in a competitive admissions pool the way that they used to. So people land a 170 or a 171 and they think to themselves that they've done it enough. But admissions doesn't ask, is this a good score? They're asking, how many people have scores like this? And the answer is more than you might think. That's why, long story short, LSAT score inflation means you probably need a higher score than you think you do because the distribution has changed. And most applicants are calibrating off of last year's medians or online anecdotes or outdated advice. But here is the key insight. Admissions thresholds move faster than applicant expectations. Schools are not going to make a big announcement saying this score does not impress us the way it used to. They just quietly adjust. And that's how you get cycles where outcomes are harsher than you might have expected because you were aiming at an old target. And so people will ask me, what kind of score do I actually need to get into a top 14 law school? Or what kind of score do I need to get a full ride to law school? And the honest answer is it's higher than the minimum you're currently comfortable with. Not because you need a 180, but because in an environment where scores are compressed, those minute differences make a massive difference. And so the difference between a 171 and a 175 is enormous, even though it only might look like 4 points. And so if your goal is a top law school or you want serious scholarship money, barely competitive is no longer a safe place to stop and throw in the towel. And that's especially true if your GPA isn't what you might have liked it to be or your background is not elite. And law schools expect you to retake now. It is normal to retake the LSAT multiple times. And if you can show an upward trend, even better, because improvement itself is a signal. It shows that you're persistent, you're willing to adapt, and you're willing to fix your weaknesses. And that differentiates you. And plateauing near the top is pretty common now. Breaking through requires precision in your studying, targeting your weak areas, diving down to the root cause of your mistakes so that you can avoid making those same mistakes next time around. And logical reasoning is where you can separate yourself because with logic games off the test, logical reasoning is now 2/3 of your score. And it's doing more work than most people realize. Most people are under preparing for it. They'll treat logical reasoning like if I do enough questions, it's going to click. And that might have worked when fewer people pushed themselves into the top ranges, but it doesn't work anymore. Separation is now a consequence of your having a true command of the material. That means you know what the different question types are, you know how wrong answers will reliably try to trick you, and you can even predict the right answer before getting to the choices. Most test takers read, then they search, but stronger test takers predict the answer, then they confirm it in the choices. And if you want a higher score than you think you might need, that's going to be where it comes from. And the sad truth is that it's not just LSAT scores compressing, it's GPAs compressing as well. GPA inflation is real because different majors have different degrees of grade inflation, and law schools are aware of that. And admissions knows this, which is why GPA alone isn't going to reassure them the way it might have used to. They want overlap. They want both your GPA and LSAT as two separate signals, both pointing to the same conclusion. So if your LSAT score does not indicate that you are an outlier, the rest of your application has to support that idea that you are truly an outlier. And a lot of people will sabotage themselves by thinking they need a hook, so they try to manufacture uniqueness in their applications or in their resumes. They try to dramatize what's a pretty ordinary or cliche experience. And admissions can see this instantly. And so ironically, when the environment is more competitive, demonstrating restraint will actually stand out. So if your application is calm and coherent, it's going to beat your trying to manufacture theater pretty much every single time. And my goal here is to recalibrate you. LSAT score inflation does not mean that the test is useless. It just means the number that you think is enough probably is not enough. The T14 LSAT score medians are all now 170 to 174, and so you ideally want a 175 to maximize your admissions. And if your GPA is below their GPA median of 3.9, you want to have above a 175 to compensate. And so if you want strong outcomes, if you want a T14 admission, if you want a full ride to law school, Your target LSAT score likely needs to be higher because the field has moved. So you don't want to stop early or throw in the towel early based on outdated assumptions. And of course, LSAT scores will continue to rise. They will continue to compress the curve. They can change the test, but they cannot manufacture preparation. You get to decide what you put into this process. Your LSAT score still is the biggest point of leverage you have in the process. And if you'd like my support, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons to everybody watching this now or later. The link is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below this video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, and in my bio on TikTok as well. Open offer to everybody watching this now or later. I'm happy to meet with you personally and talk you through your situation, your LSAT study plan, help you craft your plan of attack whenever you're taking the LSAT, whether it's February, April, June, or beyond. Open offer to everyone watching this. I'm happy to help. I see a ton of questions coming into the chat here. I will get to as many of them as I possibly can. Feel free to keep them coming. I'm going to scan through here. I see a bunch that came in already. I see Simran's asking, how important is your LSAT score versus your undergraduate GPA versus law intern experience? So your LSAT score is the #1 factor in admissions. GPA is the second most important factor, and then everything else is a distant third. And so law intern experience is nice, but it's not going to get you in if you don't have the numbers. In contrast, if you've got the numbers, you don't need to have a legal internship. So legal internship is nice to have if you already do have it, of course. Talk about it in your application essays, in your personal statement, your resume, get letters of rec related to it if you can, but don't go out and get that legal internship if you don't have the LSAT score. I'd rather that you not get the internship and study for the LSAT than get the internship at the expense of the LSAT. And the LSAT score, of course, is most important for getting into law school. Strangely, some law firms are asking for LSAT scores. I think that's frankly ridiculous, but that is a side benefit. If you have a top LSAT score, not only could it help you get into law school, but it could also maybe help you get a job upon graduating from law school, strangely enough. Orion's asking, I'm new to law. What is the best LSAT material? Thoughts on the Khan Academy? So the best LSAT material is the actual official LSAT practice tests published by the Law School Admission Council. You get 4 of them for free with your free lsac.org account. You can get the others with your Law Hub Advantage subscription, well worth the investment. LSAC has discontinued its partnership with the Khan Academy, and so anything you see on Khan Academy is severely outdated at this point for at least a couple of years. Of course, the Law Hub practice tests are great for material to study from, but most of the questions do not include any explanations. There's no one you could talk to or get feedback from on your approach. And so if you would like some support, if you were looking for guidance, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring. And beyond that, of course, we have comprehensive custom coaching programs with regular one-on-one private coaching every single week till your test, on-demand video courses, small group classes. And so if you'd like my help crafting a personal study plan, you could, of course, reach out. I'm happy to talk you through some options. Law School, great username here, is asking, what's a good score to get into a New York law school? Well, there are lots of different law schools in New York. I'm a native New Yorker myself, so I'm pretty familiar with the options. On the higher end, you have Columbia and NYU. Then you have Fordham. On the lower end, you have, for example, St. John's, Cardozo, Brooklyn Law School, Hofstra. In New Jersey, you have Rutgers. Lots of different options, but they run the gamut. And so for a top 6 law school like Columbia or NYU, you're going to want to have that 170 to 174 or higher to get in to maximize your odds. But for the lower ranked options, maybe a 165 or even a 160 could be enough. So I would recommend narrowing your goals a little bit, just thinking about, do you want to go to the top end law schools where they're going to cost more, but maybe get you better employment outcomes? Or do you want to go to a lower ranked school and get more scholarship money, maybe even a full ride? You could, of course, blanket every single law school in New York City or even New York State to get the best possible range of options. Then you could think to yourself, okay, well, if I got a 170 plus, then you could potentially get into a T6 law school like NYU or Columbia, or you might be able to get a full ride to a lower ranked school. But you get to decide what your goals are. I see Christians asking for St. John's or New York Law School, thoughts on a 3.3 GPA and a 160 LSAT on the first take. So a 3.3 GPA, to be frank, just is not that high because of grade inflation like I was discussing. And so you're going to want to have a higher LSAT score to compensate. I don't know all the exact GPA LSAT medians for all the law schools out there. So what I recommend doing is for any given law school that you're looking at, just Google the law school's name and the number 509. That will show you the American Bar Association 509 reports for all of the American Bar Association law approved law schools out there, and you'll be able to see where your numbers are relative to the schools that you're targeting. And if you're below on one number, you want to be above on the other number to compensate. And if you have a 3.3 GPA, you are, to be frank, probably below a lot of GPA medians, but you can compensate with a higher LSAT score. And the good news is, if your GPA, whatever it is, but you can still retake the LSAT for better chances. And so I recommend in many cases retaking the LSAT if you think you could have any chance of doing better. To the question here around retaking, I think Mia was asking, do you recommend retaking the LSAT twice? Yes, I do. I recommend that everybody retake the LSAT at least once, meaning I recommend everybody take it at least twice or 3 times, because law schools only consider the highest LSAT score on record. They don't penalize you for multiple takes. They don't average multiple takes. And so there's really no downside. If you think you could do better, retake. And if you end up not doing better, no big deal. There's no downside. So if you're looking to apply to law school this fall, you could take the LSAT April for your first attempt and June for your second attempt, or take it June for your first attempt and August for your second attempt. And either way, you would still be able to apply the second that applications open in September. To Cruella's question here asking, I took the LSAT when they had logic games. Is it easier now? Some people would say yes. Some people would say no. Regardless, it is what it is. And the benefit of taking the new format exam without logic games is that there's less material for you to study. You can narrow your focus. It used to be you had to study 3 different sections: games, reasoning, reading comp. Now you've only got to study 2 sections: logical reasoning and reading comp. So less material to study, a more narrow focus, and any gains that you make in your understanding of logical reasoning will be doubled across the 2 sections. So I think it's a better situation for a lot of folks, and that could be contributing to the LSAT score inflation that we're seeing. So ever since they made the change, we of course adjusted our programs, our courses. We removed everything logic games from our courses and curriculums, and we added a lot more material on logical reasoning. And so when you get a study plan from us, if you're a student in one of our programs, you'll be able to see a lot more focus on logical reasoning in there. I recommend for everybody out there, whether you're a student of ours or not, you devote your time at first to the 3 most common types of logical reasoning questions: necessary assumption, inference, and flaw. Those are the most common types of logical reasoning questions. So I'm always going to recommend starting there and mastering those before focusing on the less common types of questions like parallel or evaluate the argument. A lot of students hate parallel reasoning questions because they're so wordy, so lengthy, so time consuming. But because everything is worth the same, I recommend focusing on what shows up more frequently. And I see Ben's asking, how much are our coaching programs? We personalize every program for the individual student. This is not a one-size-fits-all mass market course. And so we look at, what's your current score? What's your goal score? When are you taking the LSAT? What's your time frame? How much time can you devote per day and per week? What law schools do you want to target? Then we craft a personal program to help you get to your goal within that time frame. And so for a student taking the LSAT in 1 month, we're going to recommend a more intensive boot camp style approach with live coaching 7 days a week, because you have less time to study, given that your exam's coming up soon. If you're taking the LSAT in roughly 3 months in April, for example, or 5 months in June, we'll take a more slow and steady approach, which is preferable, of course, all else being equal. I always recommend starting earlier rather than later so that you're not stressed and you have more time to achieve your fullest potential. But if you have less time, of course, we'll work with that. And so whatever the case may be, feel free to book that free LSAT tutoring with me through the link in my bio, and we'll be able to talk through the particulars of your situation. Just scanning through the chat here for more questions coming in. Christopher is asking, with the new style of LSAT, does a raw score translate to a lower score than the old LSAT? Broadly speaking, I'm going to say yes, due to the LSAT score inflation. So basically, it's harder to get a top LSAT score than it used to be. And if you look at the raw score conversions over time, they've basically had to make the LSAT harder to compensate for the fact that people are studying more, people are studying better, and because of the accommodations for extra time, people have more time to solve the questions. And so if you're using the old format prep tests, first of all, I wouldn't recommend doing that because they include logic games and there's no way to properly equate them. You want to use the newer practice tests on LSAC's Law Hub platform, where they updated them for the new format exam with no more logic games and more logical reasoning. But long story short, the LSAT's gotten harder. It's gotten harder to achieve. There's more competition, so they've had to adjust the curves to compensate, and more people are getting higher scores. So I hope that answers your question. But feel free to elaborate or book a call with me if you want to talk through it more. Alex is asking, what stats do you recommend to get into a top 14 law school from a non-targeted university? So when you say non-targeted university, do you mean like not an elite university, like a more middle of the road, or like a state school, a regional school? I mean, the truth is that where you went to undergrad doesn't really matter for law school admissions. They don't care where you went to undergrad because they have no incentive to care. They just care what's your LSAT, what's your GPA. Those are the two most important things to them. And so imagine that you went to Harvard for undergrad, but had a terrible LSAT and a terrible GPA. You're probably not getting into a great law school. In contrast, if you went to a state school or a regional school, got a 175 LSAT, 3.9 GPA, you've got a great shot at getting into some T14 law schools. So where you went to undergrad doesn't really matter. I wouldn't worry about that. Just aim for the highest numbers possible. Brent is asking, should I only retake my LSAT if my practice tests are within the range I want? Yeah, I think that's a pretty reasonable rule of thumb. Basically being, if your practice tests are not close to your goal score, what makes you think that you would magically jump up 5, 10, 15, 20 points overnight on the official test? If anything, a lot of students drop 5 to 8 points from their practice tests to the actual exam, maybe due to nerves, anxiety, bad proctor, tech issues. And so you want to have a buffer. If you're aiming for a 170 on the LSAT, we want you to have a 175 ideally going in so that you've got a buffer and that you're getting a 170 on your worst day and hopefully doing better, assuming everything goes smoothly. And we also want you taking at least 10 to 12 full-length practice tests before the big day so that test day itself feels like just another run-through and you've done it all before. And so in our coaching programs, we help you build a strong foundation in the different sections, the different question types, so that you're not burning through valuable limited practice material when you transition into full-length practice tests. But we also budget your time to make sure that you are taking enough full exams before the big day. And so if your LSAT is in, say, 3 months, we might have you spend 1 month on foundations, 1 month on individual sections, and 1 month on full practice tests, doing 1 or 2 full exams a week. And of course, we'll adjust things depending on the particulars and your weak areas and such, but as a general rule of thumb, that might not be a bad way to go. Christopher's asking, I got a 146 on my most recent LSAT. Does that mean I'm not fully grasping the foundations? To be frank, yeah, probably. So 146 is below the median LSAT score in general for all test takers. So in other words, it's a below average kind of score. And typically, we want to see you at a 160, 165 to indicate that you have a strong foundation in the different sections and the different question types. And so if you're not yet there and you're at a 146, for example, I would spend some more time reviewing the fundamentals, look at what are your weak areas, watch some course lesson videos on those topics, attend some live semi-private sessions on those topics, get some private coaching on those topics, and then you'll get more out of the full-length practice test that you take. But if you're at a 146, no matter what your goals are, I would put a pause on taking more practice tests and spend some more time on the fundamentals so that you're not burning through the valuable limited practice material. And feel free to book the free tutoring lesson with me through the link in my bio, and I'll be happy to talk through this in more detail with you to help you craft a better plan of attack to get you to your goal. Rolo's asking, what do you think is the curve for the January LSAT? So I think the question is based on an incorrect premise, to be frank, which is that there is no one January LSAT. When the Law School Admission Council administers any given LSAT administration for a given week, they're not just using one LSAT test form. They're actually using several different versions of the exam over the course of that testing period because they don't want someone who took it at 9 a.m. telling their friend who takes it at 4 p.m. what was on the test. And so they're constantly mixing and matching different sections, different exams. So you might get one reading comp section, and your friend who takes it later might get a totally different reading comp section even on the same day. Or you might both get the same reading comp section, but get radically different logical reasoning sections. And so it's not really possible to say there's one particular testing form. And there's no point in predicting curves because LSAC is not going to release the curve for the exam anyway. Fun fact, after you get your score back, you're not getting any other information about the test. And so you're not getting any information regarding what your raw score was. You're not getting information regarding what your test form was. And so there's not really any point in even speculating about this sort of thing since we'll never get any verification of whether these guesses were right or wrong. And so the whole idea of predicting what's going to be on the test, I think that's also pointless, to be frank, just because due to the LSAT cheating scandal that was publicized a couple months back, LSAC has stopped reusing a lot of those leaked exams. And so they are in a race to create lots of new, original, fresh content. That's also one reason why they threw everybody for a bit of a curveball on the January test, when for some folks, they discontinued the comparative dual passages. In other words, they're trying to change things up to stay one step ahead of the cheaters. And so it might have been possible in the past to predict with some degree of accuracy what test forms they were going to reuse, but they're really putting a damper on that now with all of the cheating. So I think that the prediction market is also kind of pointless here, just because they're going to change things up to make the cheating rings less effective. Dion is asking, is the LSAT score inflation new post January 2026 LSAT? No, this has been going on for a couple of years now, but it's getting worse and worse over time due to the rise in extra time LSAT accommodations. And so as more folks get extra time, extra breaks, not just time and a half on the exam, but getting double time or triple time or taking the LSAT over 2 consecutive days, getting unlimited stop-start breaks, that's just making it easier for folks to get top scores because they are not under the same time constraint that they used to be. Also, additionally, given the rise in retaking the LSAT, it's easier for folks to take it multiple times. And of course, given that the highest score is what counts, more folks retaking means more top scores as well. Jazzy's asking, are your chances of admission high when you're 1 point below both medians? I'd say no, they're not high. If you're below the medians, your chances are not high. If you're above the medians, your chances are decent, and the higher you are above the medians, the better your chances are. But I think it'd be, by definition, false to say that your chances are high when you're below last year's medians, considering that law schools are always trying to raise their medians. And so what you want to do is you want to be ideally, quote unquote, 1 point above the medians just to be on target for where they're looking to get themselves to this year. And you'd want to be 2 points above to have a higher chance of getting in. And of course, we can say you could be 1 point below or above on the LSAT median. But when we say above GPA median, I guess are you saying like 0.1 or 0.05, for example? Because when we're talking GPA, we're talking about 3.8, 3.9, or 3.91 or 3.92. But if you're below on both, I'd recommend you aim to raise your LSAT by retaking, just to at least get yourself above the median on one of those numbers. Okay, so you're saying point 0.1 below. Yeah, okay, so point 0.1 below is not bad, but if you're below, you are technically below on the GPA, so you want to be a little bit above on the LSAT to compensate for that, just to maximize your odds. Missy's asking, seeing how the LSAT is changing, do you see a change in how you tutor or prep? Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I guess the biggest change this year was the removal of the dual or comparative reading comp passages for some students, meaning that basically when you take the LSAT officially, you're not going to know going in whether you are going to have a comparative passage or not. And so preparing students for the randomness or the uncertainty around the format is one big change that we're already guiding students on who are taking the February LSAT. The second big upcoming change is the scoring of the LSAT writing sample either later this year or most likely, if not this year, then next year. So we're already beefing up our writing sample prep to account for that change. And then the change in the past most recently was the removal of the logic games section. So those are the three big changes in recent memory. Removal of logic games, which already happened a year and a half ago. The potential removal of the comparative or dual passages for some students starting last month, and then, or not last month, but last administration, and then the upcoming change to the writing sample either this year or next year. So those are the biggest changes going forward. And then the LSAT, basically, I guess, including more formal logic and conditional logic in the logical reasoning section to test those concepts that they can no longer test on the logic game section, since there is no longer any logic game section on the test. And so if you want to properly prepare yourself for logical reasoning, you want to be prepared for more formal logic, more conditional statements, more conditional chains, being proficient in chaining or connecting those statements together, being able to take the contrapositive. That's been a change over the past year and a half as well. And so we've incorporated more material on that in our coaching programs as well. And so if you want to talk through any of these changes, make sure that you're properly prepared for the LSAT whenever you're taking it. For those just joining us, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring for everybody watching this live, now or later as well on video. The link is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below this video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, and in my bio on TikTok and Instagram as well. Open offer for everyone. And by the way, if you're finding these lives helpful, I do these every single weekday, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific. If you find this helpful, please spread the word, share it to your socials, share it in your Discords or subreddits or Facebook groups, group chats, wherever you're studying with others for the LSAT. I really do appreciate your support in spreading the word. The more this grows, the more this expands, the more I'll do more with this over time. Designo's asking, how long of a time frame do you think you need minimum to be ready for the LSAT? I recommend a minimum of 2 to 3 months, ideally 5 to 6 months to reach your fullest potential. Technically, you can do it in less time, but for the biggest score increases, like if you want, for example, going from a 150 to a 170 as a non-is, I think 4 months is a pretty reasonable time frame. We have seen students do it in less time with the right support, but 4 months, like say if you're taking the LSAT in June, for example, that would be a pretty good time frame to get there. Jasmine's asking, do they care about your community college GPA versus the university GPA you plan to go to law school at? So what they ultimately care about is your LSAC calculated GPA, the grades that go into earning you your bachelor's. And so whatever is going into your LSAC GPA, that's what law schools are looking at specifically. And so if there's a difference between your undergrad GPA or your community college or 2-year associate's GPA versus your LSAC GPA, the LSAC GPA is ultimately what counts. And so that's the number that you want to look at when you're calculating your chances and deciding what your LSAT score goals might be. Cameron's asking, if I scored a 140 on my diagnostic, what do you think is a reasonable increase in score if I plan to take the June LSAT? Well, you've got 4.5 months. The sky's the limit. Don't ask me what's reasonable. Decide what is your goal and then make a plan to get to that goal in that time frame. So if you want to go from 140 to 180, it's going to take a lot of work. If you want to go from 140 to 160, it's going to take less work. So decide what law schools do you want to go to? Consider what's your undergraduate GPA. Consider, do you want to be above medians for scholarship money or to maximize your admissions? In my view, there is no reason to ever shoot for anything less than a 180. If you aim for a 180, you might not get it, but you'll get a higher score than if you were only aiming for a 160. So think about this like you're an Olympic athlete. Olympic athletes don't ask, how much work should I put in to be top to get the gold medal? They just give it their all, and then they achieve their fullest potential relative to if they had aimed lower. And so think to yourself, how badly do I want this? What time am I willing to put in? What am I willing to sacrifice to get there? What am I willing to invest to get there? If you're thinking to yourself, I only want to study with hand-me-down textbooks that are outdated, that still reference logic games, or the AI slop books on Amazon that contain fake questions and were written by ChatGPT, then you're not going to score as high as if you're using up-to-date materials like official LSAT practice tests from Law Hub and getting some more personalized support if you think that could help you achieve your fullest potential. And if you're looking for guidance, if you're looking for help, open offer for everybody. I'm offering free private one-on-one LSAT tutoring lessons over Zoom video. That's an open offer to everybody who's serious about their prep, taking the LSAT anytime in the next few months or beyond. If you're just joining us, the link is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below the video. I'm happy to help. Happy to provide my support for anyone watching this now or later. User 3063 is asking, I was a super splitter, now at a T50. Not sure if I'm lucky, but less bleak than what the podcast painted. So congrats. I'm glad that you got into a T50. That's great. As a super splitter. So for those who aren't aware, a super splitter is someone with a really high LSAT and a much lower relative GPA. So congrats on your admissions. That's awesome. I'm curious to know, what were your scholarship offers as well? Did you get any scholarship money? Because that's also an important factor as well. We don't want to just get in. Ideally, we also want scholarships, maybe even a full ride. So there's this trade-off when you're looking at law schools about scholarships versus prestige. So with given numbers, you could either get into a higher ranked school with less scholarship money or a lower ranked school with more scholarship money. And only you can decide what kind of outcome you want. Some students really want the prestige for big law or for judicial clerkships, and the prestige really matters to go to a feeder school like a T14 or a T6. Other applicants might not care as much about the prestige, and they're more interested in not paying for law school or at least minimizing their debt. One factor that might lead you to choose scholarships more over prestige is the factor of the elimination of the Grad Plus loans starting in July of this year. For those who are not aware, the federal government is discontinuing Grad Plus loans, and they're setting a cap on how much money you can borrow for graduate school education. There's a cap of $50,000 per year that you can borrow in loans. And given that the average cost of attendance for law school is $84,000, there's a $34,000 difference or gap between what you can borrow and the average cost of attendance. And so unless you want to pay that out of pocket or from friends and family or take out private loans, you probably want to get some scholarship money for law school, which means even if you could get into a given law school, getting in might not be enough. In other words, you might need to set a higher goal to not just get in, but also get significant discounts on your tuition and maybe even get a full ride. The way that you get those scholarships and discounts on your tuition is by applying with LSAT scores and GPAs above the medians. The higher you are above the medians of a given law school, the more scholarship money you're likely to get. And you can look up what the medians are for any given law school in the American Bar Association 509 reports. You just Google a given law school's name, like Google Harvard Law 509 or Yale Law 509, and you'll be able to see the metrics for last year's entering class. And then you'll know you want to aim above those numbers because law schools are always trying to raise their medians over last year's, because that's what determines, at least partially, their standing in the US News Law School rankings, which is a determinant of prestige. So consider those factors when you're applying to maximize your offers and to minimize your debt. Deanna is asking how the LSAT Unplugged programs differ from other options. And so what we aim to do is provide you with a full comprehensive support system where you're getting private coaching on a consistent basis, typically at least every single week. We're also giving you a custom study plan, laying out exactly what to do every single day from now till your test, targeting your weak areas to start with. We also give you access to live semi-private sessions 4 nights a week, all optional, all recorded, as well as our comprehensive on-demand course. And there are some options out there that don't give you any one-on-one support, where you're only either watching videos or attending webinars where you can't even talk to anybody, but you're only typing in a chat. We do ours over Zoom video, Zoom meetings specifically, so that you can be on camera, you can speak, you can interact live in conversation with the coaches and with the other students. Then you're getting private one-on-one support to give you more targeted, personalized feedback on your approach, helping you figure out what you're getting wrong and why, so that you can avoid making the same mistakes again. We use a framework called the Socratic Review Method, helping you get down into exactly what you're getting wrong and why. So we look at, for example, was your mistake in the argument, in your reading of the argument, or was it in the question stem, or in the answer choices? If it was in the argument, was it that LSAC failed to include key indicator words for evidence and conclusion, or sufficient and necessary conditions? Did they bury the conclusion in the middle of the argument? Did they fail to include indicator words for, did they fail to, did they include both a sub-conclusion and a main conclusion, which would make it harder to identify what is the primary purpose or the author's opinion in that argument? If it was in the answer choices, was it a tempting wrong answer that attracted you, or was it a discouraging right answer that did not appeal to you? So in other words, you have these traps of encouragement towards the wrong answer and traps of discouragement away from the right answer. And until you can identify exactly what you're getting wrong and why, you may end up just making the same mistake again. And so that's what we're looking to help you do: get to the root cause, get the key insights from the questions that you're doing, so that you don't just keep making the same mistakes again. Because ultimately, the LSAT is a test of pattern recognition. And so we want to help you ID the patterns in your mistakes, so that you're not just repeating the mistakes and you're improving over time. And so if you want to talk through what a personalized plan of attack could look like for you to get you to your goal score on your time frame, feel free to book the free tutoring lesson with me through the link below the video, the link in my bio, and I'll be happy to help and talk through your personal plan in more detail. I see P is asking, should I redo my undergrad or do a master's? My grades are bad. And as Randy says, your master's GPA does not count for law school admission. So in law school admissions, they're only focusing on your undergraduate GPA and LSAC's calculation of your undergraduate GPA. So you want to look at that metric specifically. And to be frank, it's a lot harder to redo all of undergrad than it is to just get a higher LSAT score. Your LSAT actually weighs more heavily than all of undergrad combined, and it's just a single day of roughly 2.5 hours. And so if through studying for the LSAT over the course of just a few months could get you better chances, that's way easier than doing 3 or 4 years of undergrad all over again. A lot cheaper, a lot easier, less time, probably the better path. Marie's asking, do you believe applying in January is disadvantageous if you meet at least one median? So the short answer is that the January LSAT is not too late for the cycle. You could even take the February LSAT and apply at the end of February, and that also would not be too late. And of course, all else being equal, better to apply earlier than later, but all else is never equal, because if you can retake the LSAT and get a higher score, it's well worth applying a little bit later. And the cycle has shifted later and later over time. Maybe 10, 20 years ago, February was too late for a lot of schools, but that's no longer the case due to all the recent changes in both the LSAT format as well as the law school admissions world. The cycle has extended over time such that February is right in the middle of the cycle, to be frank. April is late, and June is probably too late for sure, but February is not too late, and January definitely not too late. Posh is asking, can I reuse my personal statement for applications if I'm reapplying? No, you cannot. You've got to write a new personal statement. You need all new essays when you're reapplying. You want to show what's different this time, right? Hopefully there's been some change over the past year between when you applied before and when you applied again. There's that old saying that insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results. And so you want to do something different when you're reapplying to have better and different outcomes. I'm just scanning through here for more questions coming in. And by the way, folks, if you missed anything, you could watch the recording of this live and all previous lives on the YouTube channel through the link in my bio on TikTok or Instagram. You'll be able to see everything that we already covered here if you missed anything. Just scanning through lots of great questions in the chat. I apologize if I missed anything here. I'm just scanning through for anything I might have missed that I think I could shed some light on. Ben was asking, what should I use for a diagnostic test? So you can use LSAC's Law Hub Advantage platform for access to all of the practice tests, and you get access to 4 of them for free. And so if you're just kind of dipping your toes in the water of the LSAT, that's a pretty good place to start. And those are the new format LSATs, no logic games, second scored logical reasoning section, and they even included the unscored extra section to simulate the experimental section. So that's a pretty good place. Don't use any of those quizzes when you find them on Google because they're unrealistic. They often contain mistakes, and some of them were even written by ChatGPT. And so you definitely want to steer clear because those are not accurate depictions of the LSAT, and they're not. They may contain even flaws, or mistakes. S is asking, is it possible to get a 165 in 6 months? That's my practice test score, but I can't get it on the real LSAT. So first off, if you're getting 165 on your practice tests, there is probably a path to your getting it on the actual LSAT. And to be frank, I never believe that any goal is impossible. It's just a question of what you're willing to do to achieve that goal. How much work you're willing to put in, how much time are you willing to devote in hours per week and in months in total. But we want to look at what is the disconnect between your practice score and your goal score. Students often drop 5 to 8 points from their practice to the actual, and so we want to have a buffer. And we want to raise your baseline so that your practice test average is maybe a 173 going in, so that on your worst day, you're getting a 165 and hopefully doing better, assuming that everything goes smoothly. So my questions would be, in part, are you properly simulating test day conditions? Are you strictly timing your practice tests? Meaning you're taking 2 sections back to back, not checking your phone, not checking your email, not getting a snack, not talking to whoever you might live with. Then you get only a 10-minute break. And then you're doing 2 more sections back to back, and that's the test. So you can't just take 4 separate individual timed sections, 1 per day, over 4 consecutive days, add them together, and call that a practice test, because it's not testing your endurance, of course. So there are a lot of factors that go into properly simulating the exam, and if you're seeing a drop between practice and actual, it might be due to a failure to properly simulate the test. So that's one thing I would look at, or a couple things I would look at. If you want to talk through particulars, feel free to book the free tutoring with me and we could talk through it in more detail. Just go to the link in my bio, you'll be able to book a call with me and we could dig into what's going on there. But 6 months gives you plenty of time to get to the root cause there, and you're at a pretty good place to be scoring that already when you've got 6 months till your test. So I'm pretty optimistic about your prospects there. Just scanning through here for more questions. Lana fan page is asking, what are great internships and things that look good on applications? So any exposure to the law is going to look good. They want to see that you have a real world exposure to the practice of law relative to just only having pop culture understandings of it through watching Suits or Legally Blonde or Better Call Saul or things like that. So if you have the exposure through internships, that's great. Talk about it. Volunteer work's always nice. Having taken initiative and leadership roles is always great, but law school admissions is a lot less focused on extracurriculars than undergrad admissions is. So for undergrad, there's the whole thing, you want to be the president of this or that club, captain of this or that team. But for law school, it's much more numbers driven. Your LSAT score and your GPA are the primary determinants of your chances. So I would say focus more on getting the numbers and then the work exposure, work experience, or internships or icing on the cake, but they're not the primary. First and foremost, you want to have the numbers to back up your application. And if you want to get a full ride to law school, you want to be way above both the LSAT and the GPA medians to maximize your scholarships. And so if you're applying to law school right now and you're thinking to yourself, my LSAT is strong, so why are my scholarship offers smaller than what people got last year? It's due to the change in the financial engine that used to fund full ride scholarships. That engine is quietly breaking. And so for that reason, full rides are becoming rarer and offers are flatter and more conditional this year. And so if you want the full ride, you've got to negotiate smarter and harder. And for a long time, law schools followed a very predictable pricing strategy. First, they would publish a massive sticker price, like $70,000 a year in tuition, plus fees, plus living expenses. And so the total cost of attendance over the course of 3 years would end up being between $250,000 and $300,000 per year. Of course, in practice, most students didn't actually pay that price. Instead, schools would heavily discount tuition if you had a high LSAT and a high GPA, because high stats raise the school's medians, high medians improve their rankings, the rankings increase their prestige in applications, and the applications are what drives their revenue. And so scholarships functioned like a pricing tool, which raises the question, if schools are giving huge discounts to some students, where does that money come from? And for years, large merit scholarships were indirectly funded by a smaller group of students who were paying full price, paying sticker. Those were students with lower LSATs, lower GPAs, and weaker expected outcomes, because loans made it possible. Specifically, the federal lending through the Grad Plus loans. Those students paying full price were the financial engine that kept revenue flowing. They funded scholarships at the top, and they made full rides possible. But that entire system relied on one assumption, that full price students could always borrow enough to attend. But that assumption has broken because of the elimination of Grad Plus loans. And so now the question is, can you realistically repay those loans when you're going to private funders? For years, the federal Grad Plus loans have historically been broad and eligibility based, but now they're going away after July 2026. That is the change or the transition point, where there's a cap on how much you can borrow. And now we're going to private student loans. But if the expected income is modest and the debt is massive, that is a bad loan. And higher rates increase default risk. They don't fix unserviceable debt. And so the lenders are going to stop writing those loans. And of course, you can go to your family and pay full price, but most students can't afford law school when they're paying out of pocket. And so that is going to cause the system to collapse, because the marginal full pay admits won't be able to reliably borrow the full cost of tuition. And if this feels inconsistent or confusing, I totally get you. That is normal. The law schools set the scholarship budgets first, and the yield happens later. And the overspending will become obvious even later than that. And so right now, some schools are still generous, maybe more than they should be, but some schools are tightening immediately in anticipation of the change. And some schools are overspending now, and they're going to tighten really hard later. And so that's why comparing your offers to people on Reddit from last year is misleading, because the game has changed. And because this engine has weakened due to the elimination of the Grad Plus loans, you're going to see fewer full rides, more partial scholarships, more rigid GPA cutoffs, full tuition offers that quietly exclude fees, and more conditional scholarships. You're going to see more pricing models where everybody pays something and no one is getting a true full ride, because law schools have got to protect their revenue. And you can't treat law schools as one cohesive group, because they all have different needs. When you're looking at elite national placement schools, they've got stronger outcomes, they are more insulated from the changes, and they can offer targeted discounts specifically. Secondly, you've got stronger regional schools that need to protect their medians and also protect their revenue, because they are tuition dependent. For them, you're going to see GPA floors, meaning they won't take you if you are below a certain GPA, and you're going to see tighter scholarship offers. Then you have the schools that are entirely tuition dependent, and they're going to be the ones under the highest degree of stress due to the upcoming change. And so they're going to have more conditional scholarships and less aggressive discounting. Now, most applicants imagine a committee debating their personal story, looking at their application essays, connecting with them emotionally, but in reality, the scholarships are driven by LSAT and GPA, yield assumptions, and risk management. And the schools having a GPA cutoff is not personal. It's the school saying, we are not pricing certain awards for this risk bucket this cycle. So you've got to look at scholarships as pricing tools. They're not meant to be rewards for your having worked hard and studied a lot for the LSAT. Your scholarship reflects what the school thinks you will do, whether you will accept their offer of admission at a given price, and what they believe they've got to pay to influence that decision. So your job is to increase your leverage and reduce the perceived risk. And so a high LSAT score still matters, but it may not buy the same discount it used to, meaning you got to have an even higher LSAT score to compensate for all the recent LSAT score inflation. Your leverage, in addition to your numbers, comes from having multiple competing offers that you can play off each other, having a structured negotiation process, and applying broadly enough to create options, especially if you are a splitter. At this point, you probably can't change your GPA, but you can change how many offers of admission that you get. And so I want you to think about 3 different buckets where you're applying to law school. You want to look for, first, schools where you can clearly raise their medians. Those are your safety schools. You want to negotiate aggressively. You want to look at target schools where you're competitive, but not way above their numbers. And you want to look at the sticker risk schools where you want to reduce the downside or you just walk away. And each bucket requires a different tactic. So let's say that you have an offer from school A, tuition is $70,000 per year, but they're giving you quote unquote full tuition. The mandatory fees are $4,000 per year, but it's conditional, and you've got to maintain a 3.0 GPA on a curve. So your tuition is effectively zero, but you've got $12,000 in fees over 3 years, plus you have the risk of losing the scholarship if you fall below the curve. In contrast, School B has tuition of $60,000 per year. They're offering you a scholarship of $35,000 a year. That is totally guaranteed for 3 years, not conditional, and the fees are only $1,500 per year. So your net tuition is $25,000 a year times 3, $75,000 total. The fees are $4,500 per year in total, $4,500 in total. So total cost is roughly $80,000 with no risk. School A looks like a full ride. School B has a higher cost, but School A has a lot of downside risk. School B is predictable. You know what you're getting into. So School B might actually be a better offer because conditionals offers, of course, are not guaranteed. So you want to read the fine print. Before you pop the champagne and throw the confetti and celebrate any offer, you want to look for the conditions for the scholarship, if any. You want to look at the fees aside from tuition. You want to look at whether they're going to renew the scholarship or not after 1L. And you want to look at whether the deposits are non-refundable. Now, let's talk negotiation. Bad negotiation is emotional. Good negotiation is mathematical. So bad negotiation is saying, I just really want to attend, but I can't afford it. Maybe I'll just pay it anyway. Good negotiation is, I'm choosing between you and this other school. If you can improve the total cost by Y, I can commit by Z. So you're giving them choices. You're letting them know your best alternatives to accepting their offer. You also want to translate the offer into total 3-year cost, submit a structured request for reconsideration, and make a specific ask, meaning you want more scholarship money, you want a reduction in fees, you want better terms, you want them to eliminate the conditionality, and you reapproach them with any new offers you get or any deadlines you've got to adhere to. You also can ask for non-tuition levers besides just the sticker price, like them covering fees, giving you stipends, guaranteeing the renewal of the scholarship, funding your bar prep, and removing any conditions. And you want to be willing to walk away if the numbers don't work. So when you write them an email, you could say, subject line, scholarship reconsideration with your name and your LSAC ID number. You say to them, thanks for the offer. Your school remains one of my top choices. but I'm currently deciding between your school and peer school, which has offered X thousand per year, bringing my total 3-year cost to approximately 3x. If your school could increase my award by X per year or cover mandatory fees, I would be prepared to accept that offer by X date. Then you just stop and you see what happens. And you go back and forth. I recommend keeping it over email so that you can structure exactly what you want to say. They are much more experienced with these negotiations than you are because they do this every day with thousands of applicants. Now remember that scholarships only matter relative to outcomes. A larger scholarship at a school with a weak placement could be a worse deal than a smaller scholarship at a school with strong outcomes. Taking on debt without likelihood of a good outcome is the real risk. So you always want to evaluate the offers based on expected outcomes for the median student, not just random anecdotes from Reddit. Now consider that some scholarship tightening is actually consumer protection. The old system sold terrible deals to uninformed applicants. And fewer catastrophic outcomes is a good thing, but it requires smarter strategy at the top. And so if I were applying this cycle, I would apply to more schools than feels comfortable. I would treat the first offer as just a starting point and negotiate for stability and better offers, better terms, more scholarships, full rides over prestige of the school. I would focus on the outcomes. I would not get emotionally attached to any particular school. So think about whether you want to anchor on the biggest discount or the best debt to income ratio. That's how you win even when the scholarship game changes. And if you'd like my help, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring to everybody watching this now or later. Open offer. The link is unpluggedprep.com/start. Link is below this video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok as well. Open offer to everybody watching this now or later. Happy to help you craft your plan of attack. I'll be here tomorrow, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific, here on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, wherever you're watching this. I'll see you then. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care.